Good evening, everyone. I hope you're well. I've got the wonderful Natasha from Small Talk Speech and Language Therapy with me this evening. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen there so you can see faces. Fantastic. Evening, Natasha.
Hi, sorry, I literally just got home from work, so I'm so
Oh,
sorry I'm late. I'm actually never late, and now I'm late to my own webinar. I'm so sorry.
that's all right, because you're a hard-working speech and language therapist.
Yes, no, I am. How are you guys?
All right, very good. How are you?
Yes, good. Do I look blue? I can't work out if it's my camera or do I
No,
look okay?
you're
Yeah,
lovely. You
okay.
look fantastic.
No,
You always look fantastic.
it's called a filter. I actually have my tribunal filter on, so it looks like you have makeup on and you've bothered. So yes, I'm really excited actually. A lot of people have been coming the last few months and said, I really don't know why I'm here. Sunshine said I need a speech and language assessment for tribunal or HEP, and I don't really know why I need one. So I thought this is going to be a good one to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you can join me because normally it's just me harping on about stuff on our Facebook page. So,
I love
for
it.
those who are just joining us, good evening. I'm Krista from Sunshine Support. I'm joined this evening by Natasha from Small Talk Speech and Language Therapy. I can't believe I just said that. That was very skilled.
There's a lot of S's in there.
There is, there
Do you know,
is.
it's interesting about the word small talk. I saw a boy yesterday who went, I hate doing small talk. I went, so do I. And I work at somewhere called Small Talk. The irony.
The irony. Um, so, for those who are watching, please do let us know where you are, if there are any problems in your area. We know that NHS speech and language therapy is very difficult to get, and it's usually on a bit of a timer. So we're going to be talking this evening how I like to sort of describe what Natasha does versus what the NHS does is when people go to university to become a speech and language therapist, they learn loads. And then when they go to the NHS, to work for the NHS, the commissioner says you can only do this little section of what you've learned. But fortunately for Natasha, she works at Small Talk, which means she
And
can
we have
do
to do everything.
everything. So that's why we've got Natasha with us this evening, because actually when it comes down to the law, your child is eligible to receive what they need, regardless of whatever's being commissioned locally. So that's where Natasha and the wonderful people like Libby Hill, who works with Natasha,
Yep.
that's where they come into play, really. So Natasha, actually, do you want to describe yourself and introduce yourself to everybody?
Oh no, I'll try and think of only positives. Okay. So I think Chris is right. I mean, I learned everything I'll ever need to know at uni in a 1 day seminar on autism. Okay. Everything I'll ever need to know in 1 day. Actually, after 12 years, I think that I know every year, I feel like I know less. The older you get, the more you know you don't know. And
Yes.
so Chris is right. We do tend to try and specialize in something as a speech therapist, but at Small Talk, we get everybody. So we almost have to know everything. So I focus probably mostly on autism, PDA, selective mutism, and DLD, developmental language disorder as well. But we get hearing impairment, Down syndrome, PANS I had the other week,
Yeah, yeah.
ADHD. So yeah, I have to kind of do everything at Small Talk.
And the thing is, we get this, like you just mentioned, we get this comment made to us all the time. It could be school have told us we probably need speech and language, or the GP has said we need speech and language, or Sunshine, why are you recommending that I have a speech and language assessment? My child can talk. It's not about their speech, it's about their
Yes.
behavior, or it's about their attention, or it's about the difficulty they have in learning. It's nothing to do with the way that they talk. And I think sometimes the title speech and language actually confuses people because
Yeah.
it's so much more than that, isn't it?
And I think we are quite lazy and we tend to call ourselves a speech therapist.
Yeah.
So my child can't speak. So I actually get told, why do I need a speech and language therapist? Which always baffles, or they'll go, my child is really chatty. And I said, I very rarely have pre-verbal children. I do have a lot of littlies, but most of my kids who come are young adults, teenagers, you know, 8, 9 years old who are really articulate, smarter than me, and parents will read the report afterwards, and all the things I've assessed, like verbal reasoning, emotional regulation, anxiety, they'll go, "That's my kid." I'm like, "I know it is." And I was like, "But no one ever said that was going on." But I'm like, when he's throwing a chair at somebody at school, sometimes I want to throw a chair at people a little bit, at school, but I don't think they think that's a speech and language
Yeah.
issue. And then when I say, well, actually, his auditory memory is so bad that he can't really remember more than a few words at a time. He's 15. He's not going to put his hand up and say, "Hi, I'm the only one who doesn't know what he's doing." He's going to kick off, because then he can get out the class and he's like, "Phew, they won't ask me any questions in front of the other kid," which is clever. It is a clever strategy.
And this is it. I think a lot of people as well, they try and relate IQ to speech and language therapy. And again, there's no correlation there.
Not at all.
Somebody who's an absolute brain box, but if they've got poor auditory processing or poor working memory, all linked to all of then it's not going to benefit them at all to not be able to address it. We've got to address it.
I have lots of LEO-TAS kids who some of them have a higher IQ than Einstein. They are a million times smarter than me. Haven't been to school in 8 years because their ability is fabulous, but they can't concentrate with the other kids talking in class. It's too noisy. Auditory processing, so overwhelming. Sitting in those horrible school uniforms, all the sensory stuff means they just can't get out their full ability in a busy classroom.
And it's soul destroying, because some parents are aware and they fight their way, like, the sort of parent I am, I suppose, where you kind of go, no, I know that there's something and we need to unpick it.
Yes.
And I remember with one of my children, she was one of the babies in the class of reception, an August baby. She was really struggling, and the teacher said, "Oh, we think she might be autistic because she's struggling to move between tasks. She's got executive functioning impairment." They described what they felt was autism. And I was midway through my master's in autism at the time, and I've got an autistic child anyway, and I work at Sunshine Support. And I said, "I think what you're describing is executive functioning impairment with possibly, I don't know enough about speech and language, but I do feel
I know it's not that."
Yeah. And I think that we need to bring someone in." And Libby came in.
Yes.
She assessed her, and then on her 5th birthday, she got a diagnosis of developmental language disorder. And what I think we'll probably go into that quite naturally at the moment with this chat, because one of the things that's absolutely been mind-blowing for me is having an autistic child who accessed speech and language too late and really struggled to engage, And she was very, very lucky being in a residential school, so she could access speech and language at any time.
Yes, when she's ready.
When she was ready. And she did, slowly but surely, but it took a long time, and we caught her right at the end of her education. With my little one, who's now not so little because she's coming up 9.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah, we caught her right at the beginning.
Yeah.
So her experience of speech and language, and I know developmental language disorder, DLD, is very different to all the other presentations, because there's lots of things that improve and change. And we know that the research is there to show that speech and language therapy works really quickly if it's correct. And with her, she's gone from having meltdown after meltdown and, really distressed about moving from the classroom to the playground, from the playground to the classroom, word finding difficulties, kind of really having a meltdown because she can't find the word.
It is irritating.
So irritating. Now she is several years on, and she said to me today, "Mum, at the beginning of the week when I returned back to school, I was quite disappointed in myself because I left the green zone." And of course, there's zones of regulation.
Yes.
It works really well for her. And she said, "I left the green zone and I quickly allowed myself to escalate into a really dangerous, horrible place. And then I hit somebody in the face, and now I'm in trouble, but I didn't mean it. But what I am struggling with is crossing the bridge." And I said, "What bridge, sweetheart?" And she said, "Well, the bridge of," what did she call it? The guilt bridge, I think she called it, to forgiveness. And
Oh,
she said,
bless them.
I need to ask for their forgiveness, but I'm struggling to come out of feeling really guilty. So she just needed a little bit of help. And this has all come from her speech and language therapies, understanding I've done something wrong. I feel
Which
awful.
you're allowed to be out of others. You're not robots. You can
Yes.
be anxious, stressed, annoyed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And she said, I feel disappointed that I could have tried harder, I think, to stay in the green, because I could have said to my TA, I need to go outside. So she has the resources. She doesn't have
Yes.
any masking. She doesn't have selective mutism.
Yep.
DLD is so different on its own.
Yeah.
And it's almost easy. I find it easy because
Once you
has
know it, it
yeah.
feels, but I think DLD, I think a lot of people do not, I don't think a lot of people really know what DLD is, because I think the recent study said that 1 in 33 people in a study last this year in America said we're autistic, 1 in 33. But if 1 in 7 in the UK are DLD. So teachers are going to have 3 or 4 kids every year who have DLD, but nobody knows what it is. And it's more common, more prevalent than autism. And I think the two come up quite similar. You know, we have the language side of things. And because when you have a language difficulty, it's going to impact on your social side, because if you've got word finding, it's going to lower your confidence and you can't get your words out. You can't keep up with what your friends are saying. You're going to look like you have social difficulties. It's just the rigidity part of
Yes.
that we don't get. So many people come and go, it's autism. And then I assess it and go, it's DLD actually. And they're like, what's DLD? You say narrative finding difficulties. Word finding. Yeah. Social side of things, not keeping up. Yeah. It's DLD. And like, it is DLD, and I think we need more awareness of DLD.
True.
I don't think teachers are, I don't know if they can recognize it. I really didn't know a lot about DLD until I qualified, and I'm the one diagnosing it.
Yeah.
So I think you think we need more training, don't we, of professionals?
Absolutely. We did a poll, actually. It was about 18 months ago, with teachers who would access Sunshine Support. So these are teachers
Fab.
who are more aware of SEND than the average teacher, because they're already accessing and pushing forward with their learning.
Yes.
9 out of 10 did not know what DLD was.
And they're the ones who are already accessing services.
Yeah.
That's really scary.
So, and these are SENCOs. These are SEN TAs. They are higher level TAs.
Yeah.
They are the teachers that you love in your school because they get you.
And they'll go above and beyond.
But they had never heard of DLD. We even said to them, if you haven't heard of DLD, have you heard of SLI, which is, of course, the old term?
Specific language impairment. Yeah.
Never, ever, ever heard of it. So this is where our work needs to be in terms of expanding. Because what I'm really concerned about, Natasha, is speaking to a clinical psychologist just recently from the NHS. They told me that their waiting list is approaching 2,000 children for an autism assessment, but they can only see 2 to 3 children a week. Now they're saying that
they do the rest of the time.
I know. I think that's all they're commissioned to do, so they're not allowed to do anything more. So they were saying to me that what they worry about is that by the time the child gets to them, number one, they are severely traumatized. Their speech and language hasn't been addressed. And that's the number one thing that they point to. Once they've had their diagnosis or assessment, at least, they say, stop speech and language. And thirdly, they said that probably up to 50% of the children, they don't diagnose with autism. So they're on an autism pathway, but they
wasted 2 years of their child's life.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I think is really, really important for teachers and for parents to push forward with is getting these speech and language assessments so that you can get that regardless of diagnosis,
Yes, we're not very diagnosis-led at Small Talk. It's what's the needs, what's the provision that's needed to address those needs. That's quantified and specified, because people come, I assess every Tuesday, Wednesday, down their clinic is for EHCP and tribunal. And I can guarantee you've come because your child may have had a diagnosis of autism, selective mutism, DLD, PDA, whatever, for years, and you still haven't had any speech and language therapy. So you get given a letter going, here's your diagnosis, have a nice life. and you're still at the back, then you have to get in another queue, because then you're like, what do I need to get support for now?
And one of the things I remember talking to Libby about years ago, she used to say what she finds really frustrating is when a child's had their diagnosis of autism, say,
Yeah.
and they're in their school environment, and the teacher basically dismisses their needs because it's just autism. Oh yeah, that's because they're autistic. Oh yeah,
Just
they can't do
DLD.
that because of autism. And it's like, well, actually,
Yeah.
if you got the speech and language in, there's so much you could do. You shouldn't just
Everything.
dismiss a child for their diagnosis, because let's be fair, some of the most life-changing people in this world who have changed science, who have developed policies, really good stuff that has molded the way that we live today, are autistic or were autistic. And
Yeah. I always say, well, we're still being caves now. And I think an autistic person went, look, I've made a fire, or I've invented the wheel. And then there's still everybody else just going, no, we're doing it the same way every time.
Yeah.
Which I actually think is more rigid.
Yes.
And then you've had like somebody who's thinking outside of the box. But what annoys me about, you either get the diagnosis swept away, or you get, fine, I'll do the speech and language therapy because I met an autistic child once. And you're like, yay, okay, I met thousands, how dare they have different personalities? But they'll go in the broom cupboard. I have the Harry Potter bedroom in the first movie in my head, that they just take a kid in that cupboard, death by black and white photocopied handouts,
Yes.
and then send them back into the class, and there is no carryover. I'm like, you have to do the DLD stuff, all the autism stuff in the class,
Yes.
embed the strategies in the work, not death by handouts from Twinkle for 20 minutes and send them back in. Because the kids know the answers.
Yeah.
Holding up a smiley face and going, how does this man feel? He's happy. Okay, great. Go outside and make friends.
Laugh because it happens. It happens all the time.
It does. And I think more training is needed. Libby and I say, we've got all the books. We've got all the books. We've read all the books. We've been on the courses. We've read all that. We do so much CPD, like at least probably every day we read something different. But it's looking to like the autistic adults themselves, the parents of the DLD kids. That's who we learn the best stuff from, not the books, the textbooks, is the parents.
Yeah. Parents are the experts, aren't they? Well, I was having this conversation today, actually, with a colleague, because we were talking about when a child is usually so traumatized by the system and by all these people that keep prodding and poking. Yeah, absolutely. It's so common, isn't it?
Yeah.
Particularly if they're a neurodivergent child, if they're autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, the list is endless.
Yeah.
But these kids have been misunderstood and put into a system that does not meet their needs. It's hugely traumatizing. And so they start to shut down, because why would you want to talk to anyone? Nobody gets you. So
and they know that. They know if they tell me what teachers irritate them, and if they didn't tell me names and I went to that school, I think I could guess which teachers wouldn't get them, because they labeled us the naughty kid. He's choosing. I had a kid the other day who has been in detention every day for 3 years. I'm like, what is going on? Who chooses to be naughty and irritate the teacher every day? But all they're putting in place is he has goals. He has to carry this piece of paper around of, I will not shout out in class. Okay, that's great. I can't stop interrupting sometimes. That's, he's got ADHD and he's autistic. That's on him. I'm like, so what's everyone else doing? Well, what do you mean? Well, aren't you owning your own part? He's 13, 14. How are you going to help him? And they were like, oh no, it's all his responsibility. So parents sometimes get confused with my reports, because everything always has to be quantified and specified. If you don't say it's this amount of time and this is person, parents cannot enforce it. But they'll say he needs all this speech and language therapy. And I'll say he does, but speech and language therapy isn't me doing worksheets with him. It's training his teachers to do it in the moment. And when he's about to kick off, say, come on, mate, let's go play football outside for 10 minutes and let's have a chat. Not, okay, let's kick off and ring Tash to come in and kind of do work with him.
Yeah, so talk to me then a bit about the sort of work that you do in schools.
So training is, I don't think I've ever written a report without putting school training. And I get met with, my kids already, my school's already had autism training. Like, that's amazing. I mean, James specific training, not just generic handouts that everyone's got from the National Autistic Society. So training on everything, training on what does auditory processing look like in the class? How is he coping in a big class? He probably isn't. Does he, do we need to give him a small group area? What about verbal reasoning? Is he understanding when you're reading English? Maths is fine until we hit applied maths and all the language comes in. Ben walks into a shop and he's got £3.50. Oh, we all hate those questions. That's where we fall down, and they don't think that's got anything to do with speech and language therapy. But I'm like, the kid isn't actually understanding what is needed from him. So if you don't give him any examples, he's not going to know what's expected of him. They think speech and language therapy is talking, friends, and generally understanding. They don't understand that it's in science, PE. I did a training the other week on autism, and I said, my guy can't do team sports. He doesn't get it. When the ball hits him in football, he thinks he's being bullied, and he's not quite understanding that it kind of is a contact sport. I do believe if you feel like you're being bullied, that's how you feel. And it's not for me to say you're not being bullied, but he didn't get PE. He's like, he stands there, he doesn't run for the goal. He's like, how does he know where he's going to kick it? I'm like, it's his perspective taking. He's kind of reading the signs, he's running up, and my guy's standing there going, no one's kicking the ball to me. I'm like, gotta run. But he doesn't get it. So trying to show how speech and language therapy is in all lessons, how the kid that you think is struggling the most might not be. I had a boy the other week, he said, I don't want friends. And lots of people, when they've had a bad time and peers haven't been very nice, do put a wall up and say, but I know deep down they do. This guy really didn't. He was like, I just want people to leave me alone. And his school were intent on shoving him into friendship groups. And he's like, just tell him to leave me alone. And he is blissfully happy by himself, So, and I said, that kid actually over there who is masking and is laughing along with his friends, he's having a worse time because he hasn't got a clue what his friends are saying. And, he needs a bit more help than this kid who just wants to read his book in peace.
Yeah.
So it's child specific training, not, how does executive functioning affect your child? Not let's just do a generic, this is where executive functioning is. So I think training is the most important part of speech therapy, I think.
Absolutely. And we have a speech and language therapist that works directly with my 8-year-old or 9-year-old, as she keeps telling me. And what I absolutely love, she keeps in touch with us she comes to the house, we have a cup of tea, and she talks to us about, what's going on in school. And just recently she described how different my daughter is in school. She doesn't ever mask, but she likes to throw her weight around a little bit because she understands she's got an EHCP. So you can't do that because I've got an EHCP. And I was mortified.
I could do with her being my assistant.
So I was mortified, and I said, that's not how we tell her to talk. It's not like she's trained that way. What do I do? And she said, it's okay. I'm there to coach school. I'll be the person that is the buffer. You don't have to do anything. You just keep being you. And I will continue to do my job. And what a relief it was, because I think quite often, and I know you guys come across this a lot in your work, the parent blame. I'm sure they talk to you because you're they do it to us where they have like a little quiet word because you're a professional, and they're like, well, that parent thinks it's so much worse than it actually is.
They've got nothing else to do with their life and make all this up, and their own mental health and their own money and their own time. They've got nothing else to do, have they, then make it all up.
Make it all up. Yeah. And
Yeah.
parental blame is huge, and it's a very, very slippery slope. And we know we've got FII week coming up, you know,
Oh,
that is
yes.
the beginning of
That's going to be
May.
an important one because we have so many FIIs. I think parents going to really need that one.
And, you know, back to the sort of speech and language element of that, I don't think enough is parents are afforded enough respect when it comes to their own speech and language when they're under pressure. So we talk about, you know, children being stressed out in school in a state of distress, not able to effectively communicate. But then the parents are put under fire and they're expected to communicate as if there's nothing going on in their emotions and that they're
But
completely.
anxiety blocks your processing. I could be in tribunal. I'm getting absolutely hounded, and then I'm like, oh no, I forgot my point. Oh, okay. So I have to have my post-it notes, hidden in the screen because anxiety blocks your processing. And I think it's a double-edged sword with what you said about parents being the experts, because my job is to assess the child, write provision, get it in the EHCP, and then obviously have to go to tribunal to get it if no one's agreeing. And I don't know what annoys me more. I do like to get what I want. I'm not very good at negotiating. I get, you said twice a week. Could it be once? I'm like, well, if I meant once, I'd have said once. So no, it's twice. But then when I get what I've asked for, it irritates me because I think, but this parent's been saying what I've been saying for 5 years. Why has it had to take me to see the kid once, rock up at the meeting, and you just roll over and give it me? I'm glad you have, but it just grates me because I think this parent's been saying this all this time and you haven't taken their word for it. I write it and apparently it's all become magically true. Just
Yes,
really
yes.
does bug me.
It is very frustrating. And I think from a parent's point of view, and I can wear both hats in
Yeah.
this, but from a parent's point of view, actually from an advocacy sort of point of view as well, it's quite frustrating to see that it will say, Natasha Hallam says, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
If it was me, it would say, Mum reports.
Oh, Mom, I hate that.
My name's Chrissa.
I was a person before I gave birth.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, I think I'm a person. I forgot who I
Yeah.
am. I'm definitely a person. But it's interesting how it's always reports. They never say, you know, this is fact because Mum said it was fact.
Yes,
It's apparently. That's how it comes across. Well,
it
apparently
does.
Mum said.
But I feel like reports say, I get a lot of reports from, certain professionals. I'm not going to name anyone in particular, but they say things like, Mum says, Mum says, Mum says, all the way through the report. Yes, I do write in my report. Mrs. Ward explains that Joshua has attention and listening difficulties. I saw that in the assessment when. So I do always put in a parent's opinion because I find I'm often the only person who's ever documented the parent's opinion. But it almost needs, I have to say it as well because it just looks like she's just saying all of this, but I don't really believe her or agree with her. And I can see why when parents come, it's not that they're not the experts and they don't know their child needs speech therapy. No one's explained what a speech therapist does to them. They say, just go and then when we go through it, like he does that all the time. Like, I know, but no one put a word, like you said, no one put DLD to it, you know it, but no one's giving you the credit. I went to the Aaron York Accepting Behaviour Conference and someone said something that literally rung true. They said, if a child, because most of the kids I have are not at school anymore, they've come, I'm not saying they've come to me too late, but I can't help with school because the kid just needs a total break from school for a bit.
Yeah.
But they said, if a child was at school under the desk crying and screaming and saying, I'm too scared to go home, what would we do? And they went, of course, we'd be ringing social, we'd be like panicking, checking in on the parents. But apparently, when our kids are at home crying and screaming and having an absolute melt breakdown, going, don't send me to school, I'm too scared, parents are forced to drag them in, kicking and screaming.
And the problem is
it's the other way around.
Yeah, I think it's so frustrating because when we're talking about school avoidance, it always comes down to, well, the parent isn't trying hard enough. And actually, I've got a little handout here that people can download for free off our
And
website.
I'm glad we're starting to call it school avoid rather than school refuser, because
Yeah,
I feel like that's a choice. And I
yes.
feel like saying to them, I feel like if I could speak with a parent, I'd say, well, you come round at 7:30 and you see if you can get him to school without carrying him with all his arms and legs into the car with two people.
Absolutely. One of the things I'll point out now, actually, is a little
I love that one. Yeah.
School climate. So for those who have a child who, you know, is really struggling to attend school, download one of these off our website. They're all free. School climate is the first thing I would look at, because it's not necessarily that the school is wrong. It's that the
They
school
just not, yes.
suitable for the child. So it's the first thing to be looking at, really. We've also got some for school refusal that we've put in inverted commas, because
Yes,
it's not
of course.
refusal, but unfortunately an awful lot of people are looking for the word refusal. So when we're training them,
That
meet
is
them
the
where they
thing.
are.
Yes, if you write school avoidance, no one's typing that into people
No.
aren't typing that in. So that is a really good way of saying it. And I think I do say to parents, so what's going on? And they say, I said, a school, is the heart in the right place? And they say, yes. And I'm like, but that doesn't mean they know exactly what they're doing. And most schools do try their best, but they're not speech and language therapists. I couldn't be a Senko, you know, I definitely could not be a teacher, you know, I'm one kid at a time kind of person.
Yeah.
That's all I can deal with, you know. I don't know how they feel having 33, but that's not my kid's fault. The kid that I'm working with, that's not their fault that there's 35 other kids in the class. I have to say, well, I'm advocating for this child. And I find a lot of parents who actually have told me this is not my opinion. I have a lot of single parents who are also neurodiverse, and I feel out of all the kind of, I'm saying a lot of parents have a bad time, but they seem to be the most vulnerable in terms of, like you said, going into a meeting and they're like, can you just kind of maybe write things down for me, because I'm not, we don't put anything in writing, you know, you could hold it against us. I'm like, I'm not trying to trick you. I just need to process this in my own time when I get home. And they seem to be quite, I think that's why advocates and like Sunshine and stuff they need you guys, because they seem to get taken advantage of such a lot.
They do. I remember it well. I mean, I'm married, and I remember being taken advantage of. And you know, we see it all the time. We see, you know, single parents coming to us and saying, you know, they're not believing me. And sometimes it's really, really sad. And this is going completely off piste into social care. But sometimes they have that parent alienation where the parent who isn't in sort of caregiving all the time sees the masking child rather than the true child, and therefore takes the side of the system. And it's really, really, really sad. There's a lot of gaslighting that goes on in the SEND world.
Yes, I think selective mutism gets dragged into that a lot. I diagnosed, I've just I'm now on the National Autistic Society SEND committee. Yay. So I'm hoping to kind of get my teeth into doing that, because I feel I get children who already have a diagnosis. Yes, I do diagnose selective mutism, and I know Libby did a great webinar on it the other week. But I get kids who have a diagnosis where the diagnosis report has said, when the child refuses to talk, and I'm like, you've diagnosed it and you don't know. But then I find when children go to other parents, maybe every other weekend, I get a lot of parents who think the other mom they don't quite see the selective mutism, should I say. So we are going to do a webinar on that for parents, because I think primary caregiver gets it sometimes. And I think because kids, especially with low profile selective mutism, can just almost suck it up and just say a couple of words and force it out, they're like, oh, see, you know, you're telling him not to speak to us. And not everybody, and I think schools go, I'd love 30 of him in the class. Of course, he never says anything. Of course you'd want 30, but it's not good for the child having selective mutism. And so I think
it's really heartbreaking. It's interesting. I have been very aware of a certain type part of my presentation as a child. into adulthood, it got worse and worse and worse. And I just shamed myself saying, you're just stupid. Why can you not do that? Why are you useless when it comes to that? And I remember going to Libby's first ever selective mutism webinar. Now, by which point I'd had one of my kids diagnosed with selective mutism.
Yeah.
And my understanding wasn't great. And so I went along to the workshop. I think it was one of ours, actually, back in the old days, pre-COVID days. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is me. And it's about, a lot of people think with selective mutism, number one, it's not elective. You don't choose to not be able to speak.
I wish we'd call it situational mutism, actually, not selective.
It's definitely situational. And what I also noticed, mine is low profile. So I actually hate the silence. So I over talk, but completely disregard all my own needs. So it's really hard. If I'm in a certain scenario, and I've done it before where I'm starving, I've gone to an event and there's a big dinner or whatever on, or a buffet. Buffets are the worst. They're great. I love them if it was my buffet. But if it's at a certain place, like a business event, oh my goodness. And I cannot bring myself to leave my chair to go to the buffet. I cannot do it.
Because everyone's going to turn and look at you when you get off your chair. Yeah, I know.
There's not enough, where I hate it in schools where they say, oh, I've given the child a get out of jail free card, as I call them.
The first thing I say is, how long does it take you before you threw that in the bin? And parents like, you've thrown it in the bin. Like, he's not going to use that. That's drawing more attention to him. So many parents come and I talk about if I screen for ADHD or we do an autism assessment or DLD or selective mutism. So many parents ring me when they've read the report and gone, I think that's me. And I'm like, it might be actually. I had selective mutism as a child. Now people go, you don't stop talking. I'm like, it's overcompensation. It's verbal diarrhea because I'm stressed. And I think there is a big thing between the NHS and us. I think people think we don't like the NHS.
Oh, no.
And it's not that. It's just when I'm in tribunal and we get put against each other, I am honest and I say it's not the other speech therapist's fault. If I spent 39 hours writing a report last week, that's, half of my working week on one person. I had the time to do that. I wanted to do that. They don't have the capacity to do that, regardless of how complex, what's going on. They're like, I just get 15 minutes to write a little letter, and it's not their fault.
No.
Because they haven't had the training we have, they haven't got the time, they're on that kind of ever going conveyor belt. And sometimes they're honest and say, I would never have gotten a report like this because I haven't got this much time to spend with the child to know that he, feels like Hulk at home and Bruce Banner at school because he's stressed.
Yeah.
But that's not my kid's fault either. I have to say, but if you're not quantifying it and specifying it, it's really wasting the child's time.
Yeah. It's traumatizing them. They're not having
it is. And sometimes they are so over-assessed. They come and I feel awful having to do the assessment. Like, is this the one with a picture of the man pushing the horse? I'm like, how many times have you done this? Yeah. But because no one's actually, and I say to them, you should never really need to do this ever again. Once I've done it, that'll be it. Yes. Apart from just reassessing the targets and making sure we are going along the right lines and adapting the program if it's not fitting him after a few weeks, you really shouldn't just be doing death by standardized assessments all the time. It's not necessary, really.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, we see in local authorities sometimes when they are commissioned, say, for instance, we've done the speech and language assessment with you guys, and we submit it and they go, right, we're going to get hours to assess. And quite often theirs goes, no, because that is not something I can compete with. So I am not doing it. We are not over-assessing the child.
And that's good that they're honest.
Yes, it doesn't happen often enough, but sometimes.
No, I know.
Natasha, for the purpose of those watching tonight, and we'll come to the questions in a minute because I'm aware that we've been gasbagging for the last 40 minutes.
I was like, I don't think I can talk for an hour about speech and language therapy. My husband went, I've had 10 years of this. You will be fine for an hour. I think you could be an assistant. But yeah, it's because we're passionate.
I'll come to the questions in a sec. But before I do, for the purpose of those who've never, ever had a speech and language assessment, what can they expect, from start to finish? If they were to give you a call tomorrow and say,
Yeah.
book us in, from start to finish, what can they expect from each part of the process?
So the first thing to do is obviously we would get the child in. We used to read all the reports, because it's surprising, especially from the HCP and tribunal. You've got to make sure, if you have a speech and language report, assessment report, that it's not only quantified and specified, but that it's cross-referenced. Because if I write, the child has attention listening differences, I get called out and gone, that's just your opinion. And I'm like, but actually the EP said it and the OT said it and mum said it, Mrs. Jones has said it. So making sure you've got all your evidence together, because we want to read everything, even if it's rubbish, even if it's the worst report you've ever had on your child. So we would read all the reports, we'd get you in, we'd do an assessment. Now, yes, there is certain ones that we use, but it's very, very bespoke on the day. Some children I have not got anything out of. I'm naturally quite low arousal, but I do it on Zoom, and sometimes they can't come on the computer screen because they're so anxious. Fine. We can use the chat box. Still hard? Fine. What about we turn the camera off and I can't see you and you just kind of have a chat with me? Fine. You don't always have to do standardized assessments. If you can, great. It kind of does give us some, like the hidden things they might be finding hard that no one has picked up on because they're so chatty. How could my child have a language difficulty? He never stops talking. But you don't, if you know your child can't do that because they're too anxious, that's okay. Our child came the other day, sat in the boot of the car. It sat in the car. I sat in the boot with the lid open, just screamed, told me to go and F myself, really wasn't coping. After about 20 minutes, I said, you might as well take him home. It's just stressing him out. I still wrote a 79-page report and I still won a tribunal. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go full-on standardized assessments. If they've already been done by the NHS, I'm not going to bore your child and do them again.
Yes.
Got to be what is needed. But it's surprising what does materialize in the assessment. So you come for autism, you leave with a DLD and selective mutism diagnosis. But then, we have to read everybody else's. A parent caught me out the other day because I said, have you sent me everything? Yes. I said, are you sure? She said, yes. And I went, even if it's rubbish, I haven't sent you the EP report. I said, that's fine. why haven't you sent it? I was really scared because everybody has said there are no speech and language needs. And I'm worried that if you read it, it's going to change your mind on my child. I said, I promise it won't. What my job is to write in the report, yes, this person said this, but they're wrong. Yes. And this is why. Just so it's like a story, because if you get sent, if the tribunal panel all the people get sent the report, how can they decide if the NHS is saying one thing and I'm saying something else? They're not speech and language therapists. It's, basically who can argue it the best. So if I can read everything and say, a child came in January, she was 5 years old, 5 private speech and language assessments last year by 5 different private speech and language companies. And I said, why do you need me? And her mum said, just look. And everyone had read the one before and gone, oh, I agree with that woman. But so by the time the 4th and the 5th person are reading and 3 previous speech therapists are saying there is no needs, it's quite hard to not get railroaded down a path. But that mum was adamant. I know the speech and language needs. And I said, there is 59 pages in my report of speech and language needs.
Wow.
But that's why we need to read what everyone else is saying, because parents know that parents can feel it, can't they?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You have an autism diagnosis, but it doesn't explain everything. They come 3 years later and they get an ADHD diagnosis, is because they're there was just something else. So it's really important that your professionals, whoever you go to, psychologists, OTs, read all the evidence. it's going to be much easier to argue it if you end up in appeal if
Yes.
you've explained it all.
Yeah, it's just getting all that information, isn't it? And in terms of the assessment you do, obviously I had the wonderful experience of watching one because I assisted a family a couple of weeks ago.
You did, yes, and the dog was there.
Yes, I left with an asthma attack, by the way. I had an asthma attack all the way home because of the dog.
We need to start dusting.
No, it was the dog. I'm allergic to dogs, but it was worth it for Ralph. It was worth it for Ralph. So for everybody who's watching, if you've got a child, if you're considering a speech and language assessment and your child likes dogs, let the team know at Small Talk, because I was very, very lucky to watch a young lady having her assessments, and I found it absolutely, I thought I was going to cry. I had to keep like putting my head down.
Ralph has a magic wand.
He knew exactly when she was starting to feel stressed out, and he moved towards her. He did what he needed to do. He calmed her right down. She's just the most beautiful kid. I just love her. She's great. But Libby knew then to sort of back off a little bit, because that
Ralph then tells Libby this child might be smiling and laughing, but inside they're getting really anxious. So Ralph then tells Libby, and then Libby pulls back, doesn't she?
It's amazing to watch. I've never seen anything like it. And
he is brilliant.
People laugh because they say I've got like a part of my heart that must be dead because I'm not really into dogs. That's the first time I've gone, oh my God, I want a dog. I want a dog like Ralph.
I might be able to, I might stop breathing in the night.
Yeah, but it's fine. It's worth it.
The thing is, that's the thing though, is, you know, it's got to be when my job is not to go, we've got to get through this assessment. If they can't do it, lots of times that can be my evidence. I will say, you've done no standardized assessments, and let's say, isn't that proof?
Yeah.
I could pretty much get any kid to do anything, and if I can't get them, or if me and Libby cannot get them to do an assessment, that just shows how much support and they need and how anxious they are. And that's a priority, not working out how many words they remembered on recalling sentences. Yeah. It's mental health, you know, good self-esteem, understanding their own diagnosis, good self-worth. That's where speech and language therapy has to start. Self-advocacy, you know, being able to kind of set your own boundaries, set your own goals. My job is not to give your child tools to say, this is how to be. My job is to say, anything you want to work on, here's some tools. If you don't want to use them, that's fine. Yeah. My job is to equip you with them, and use them as you will at what you want to do.
I love
you know, it's, I mean, there's a big thing going on, and I'm not going to say her name because I do not want to give her airtime. It's a very what's the word?
I know where you're going with this.
Outspoken so-called child behavior expert. So it's dangerous. You cannot go around saying, here's how to get over autism. We've done such a lot of work as professionals to advocate with the autism community, you know, to say these people are the experts, the parents, the autistic adults themselves, they are the experts. You're just knocking us all back 30 years by just spouting rubbish like that on the internet.
Archaic. I mean, this professional, if you want to call her that, was saying the same stuff when my eldest was a baby, and she's now 20. So
yes,
no change. Science has moved on. It's moved on.
That's what I think scares people from going to speech and language therapist, because I know she's not a speech and language therapist, but I think people worry about professionals because they think, well, if they're all saying that rubbish, I'm not going to put my child through that.
Absolutely. And actually, this is something a parent said to me recently, and they brought their child along to Small Talk, and they said, shall I wind her up before she comes? And I said, no. Well, how will they see how she truly is? So that's not what they're assessing. They're assessing how her brain is working, how her ears are working, how it's all working together. And she said, right, will it go in my favor though if she does kick off? And I said, I remember feeling like this because of a child who masks.
How much has that parent not been believed in the past though, if she feels she needs to do that?
Trauma. So
parent trauma.
It's so sad, but at the same time, as a parent who I've been there, I remember it well, you know, being told constantly they're fine in school.
Oh, we call that the F word at small talk. Fine at school.
The F word, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The F word.
But it's so frustrating. I'm going to come to some questions
Yeah.
now. So I'm going to go right back to the start. Hopefully they're going to load on my phone. Somebody's asked if we can issue a certificate of attendance. This is just like a live stream tonight, so it's not an official one, but we do a variety of official training. And actually, we've got a lot of small talk webinars on our Sunshine Academy.
Very specific
Very
topics, aren't they?
specific. Yeah, very, very specific. And that is, we call it our Sendflix, because it's like Netflix. You pay $9.99 a month and you get access to hundreds of courses. So, and you can unsubscribe at any time. So you do get CPT certificates with them. So if you want to go on and do something a bit more formal, that's fine.
This was kind of to show you what we did to them, so parents could go, oh, DLD, that sounds like a light bulb moment. Let me go on and learn more about that from a webinar.
And there is so much. We've got Carrie saying, we had an assessment with Natasha. She's fantastic. So
thank you. I do try.
Family. So hi, my daughter has an EHCP and an EOTAS package. We have never had a SALT assessment. So some people call speech and language SALT.
Yes.
Never had a SALT assessment, but we are unsure whether it may be needed. I would probably say if you've got an EHCP and an EOTAS package, that is one of the most complicated packages you could get.
I agree. And I do a lot of the speech therapy for EOTAS kids, and what is needed is the mentor. You need to speak, it doesn't have to be the tutor. Sometimes it's better to be somebody different than doing all the work for EOTAS, but a mentor that is going to go through like the preparation for adulthood and work on self-advocacy, a neurodiverse affirming speech and language package that is blended through the EOTAS. So it doesn't always have to be weekly speech and language therapy. It's actually better for someone who might see the child 3 times a week and go to the cinema with them, go to the shop and, do all the EOTAS extra, the things that they like, and do the speech and language therapy in real time. So if you have an EHP and EOTAS, no one's ever left and gone, I didn't think I needed this. Yeah. So
nobody regrets that.
Oh, actually, they might have told me. I just haven't heard from them again. But no, don't say that was that. They learn a lot, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. By the way, if you wanted to, with regards to this, you can commission your own. You can also force the local authority's hand by way of, there's lots of different ways of via.
They can't find their own speech therapist to do it. Yeah.
No, there's nobody available anyway. So I think a lot of people are going private in terms of local authorities anyway, aren't they?
Yeah. But then that's the thing about the EHCP. People, it seems unfair that you have to pay, and I totally agree, which sounds silly because I am the independent, but my job is to say, let's get this in the EHCP, because then it's quantified and specified and not the responsibility of the parent to pay for it for the rest, till the child's 25 kind of thing. So that's what my job is. You do have the initial outlay, but that's what I go to tribunal for, to fight, to say, this child needs it, and it's not the job of the parent to have to pay for it.
Absolutely. And it gets funded all the time. I think a lot of people think that they can only have the NHS sessions, which are often very limited.
Lots of local authorities employ us, actually, because they haven't got their own. They actually have to ask us. And
if it's in the EHCP, they have to have it. It's as simple as that. They can't go cutting it without proof that they are able to cut it.
Yes.
And yes, sometimes things are cut, and I think it's very important for me to say that at the moment. I've got one of my daughters, she's got sensory processing difficulties, very mild though. I've got another daughter with significant sensory processing difficulties, and there's a massive difference. But what we did is we got in there nice and early, age 6. It sounds like I've got millions of kids, doesn't it? Hundreds of kids. And we got in there early, and one of the main problems for me was wetting through the day and wetting through the night. Within the 12-week course with your lovely friends over at
Children's Choice.
Yes, I was thinking Children's Choice. I was thinking, is it? I can see the logo.
Yes, I know. I've worked with all of them in a school at some point.
So Kezia did work with did a interoceptive curriculum for 12 weeks. Now Kezia isn't needed anymore, because that is all those problems are
Brilliant.
I hate
Yes.
the word fixed, but they
Yes.
needed fixing.
They've
So they
gone.
needed,
Yeah.
yeah, they've gone. Absolutely. So sometimes is what I'm saying, you can not need something anymore. And so you can be in agreement with the parent. Yep, that can fall out to the EHCP. I'm fine with that.
It can, but only the OT can take the OT out. Only the speech and language therapist can take the speech and language provision out.
Exactly. And interestingly enough, Kezia is absolutely brilliant. And she said, even though we can see it's working, I would like to review. We will continue to review for at least a year.
I'm much like that, yes.
And I think that way, then you're protected, aren't you? You're not having to fight to get it back in.
And get back in the queue when you've spent, the whole 3 years in it for. I know.
Yeah, exactly. So somebody called Laura said, evening, Laura. Not had an assessment with Natasha, but I've had one for my daughter and currently Dawn for my son. Amazing assessments. There we are. Part of the dream team. Okay, my son has a private speech and language report from the autistic SLT, but his school won't pay any attention to it as it contradicts his basic NHS assessment. Where do I stand with that? Because the NHS won't accept the private one.
They do often say they don't accept it. I think that's just because they very rarely quantify provision. So definitely you need to get it in the EHCP, because that's what I go to tribunal for. They're saying they don't agree with me. Their NHS has said language disorder. And I say, do you mean DLD, developmental language disorder? They're quite often sometimes reluctant to write DLD because I have the evidence to say this kid will probably need weekly speech and language therapy because they have DLD. So get your EHCP, get it in there. And I do know who you're talking about for the independent one. See if she will write it as an EHCP report if it isn't already. So it needs to be section B, all the needs, section E, all the outcomes, section F, all the provision to meet the needs. So what you need, who's doing it, how often, because if you could have all the waffle in the world, but you haven't, that's the most important bit, really. I might write a 95-page report. The first 5 pages of B, E, and F are the most important. That's the only ones an advocate really looks at, because that's the most important bit. Yeah. They often say they won't accept it. Just put your foot down and go for an EHCP. What would you say, Chrissa?
Yeah, 100%. You've got evidence. The fact you've had several assessments says there is a need. You've met the legal threshold for the EHC needs assessment. And if that parent is still watching, get in touch so we can just send you some. We've got tons of free downloads, loads of free resources on our website. By all means, have a little look around or just send us a message and we'll send you some direct links. I think one of the things as well that I've noticed with my own children and with the ones that we support at Sunshine is the NHS, whether it's an OT or a speech and language, will say, I appreciate you're probably going to go for a private report, but I'm not allowed to write that stuff.
I can't believe they actually say I'm not allowed, because if Libby told me to what to write, not what to write, I wouldn't work with her anymore. And I think sometimes what they look at can be different. So if I was just going through a report in my head now that I wrote yesterday, I looked at attention and listening. Can this kid sit on a chair for 60 minutes? No. Okay, we need breaks. Then I looked at auditory processing. Actually, I think this kid needs a small class size because they cannot focus and process with a room with lots of background noise. Then we look at memory, working memory, understanding, kind of the higher level abstract, reading between the lines. Yeah. We don't use the phrase theory of mind anymore. We say perspective taking, but if this child cannot consistently think, work out, predict what other people are thinking, that person's intentions towards them and what they're going to get them to do, it leaves them really socially vulnerable. So they need speech and language therapy. We've got, when I say social, we don't do social skills. We do, social thinking, not the program. We, kind of social cognition, emotional regulation, lots of things that when I look in other people's reports, they just aren't looking for. They're not executive functioning. They're just not quality. They just haven't been on additional training to look for everything. They're only looking at Well, he was having a chat and he kind of looked like he could cope in a social situation. So, okay, then we'll say there's no needs.
Yeah, it's fine. Oh, that word. Does it have to happen in a school, or can a child who is at home or is it homeschooled, can they be assessed at home? As my daughter used to go to school, but due to school leaving her traumatized, because her needs weren't met, she is selectively mute and anxious. So you can undertake assessments in different settings.
We very rarely do them at school, and we get criticized. Sometimes they'll say you haven't done it at school. I don't need to see that kid at school. I know what that kid's going to look like at school, either kicking off like parents have told me, or masking most of the time. So we would only ever do it. We either do it in their home or we do it at our clinic. We don't really need to see the kid at school because we know what it's going to look like at school. And it's usually just like what Chris is doing now. Hi, okay, yeah, okay. So it's probably best not to do it at school. It's best, I feel, to do it away from school. So the child is more likely to be themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Helen says, I was thinking how I could get my daughter to come and open up to you, and you've just made me cry telling me about Ralph.
Oh, bless.
And then Laura said, my son has selective mutism, Helen. So this is a reply to Helen. And Small Talk are the only people who've managed to get him to do any formal assessments. His have been done over Zoom and they are amazing. Helen says the F word, exactly what it is.
Yes, I know. The thing is, some parents say to me, I'm the only person professional their child has ever spoken to. That doesn't mean it's not selective mutism. No. If you come into the clinic and I say, do you know what? You don't have to speak to me. I'm not bothered. It won't offend me. Suddenly, anxiety's down. Okay. And I say, yeah, my job's not to make you go to school either. I don't really care if you never go. You know, it's coming down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we don't get your kid to do anything, that's why we send all the forms home, because parents know the answers. Parents do them and send it me back. And then I say, parents have given me the information. I agree. And this is the provision. So even the most anxious people, those are the people we tend to get, actually, that no one else knows how to help.
Absolutely. And I think another thing to sort of alleviate the stresses from parents, I know as a parent myself, one of my worries for my child who was a masker with selective mutism, autism, PDA, ADHD, the full complement of beautiful.
Yes, diagnostic soup.
Yeah, absolutely. I always worried that if any of the professionals that I hired spoke to school would have a very different, because of the fine in school, they'd have a very count. However, we had one recently where a school has completely failed a child, left them far too long without any support, continued to accept that they didn't make any progress year on year. They were still working at reception age and they're now 11. And we brought the child in to see Libby. And Libby said that, it's going to be okay. I can see straight through what's going on. I can see exactly what's going on. And when she submitted the forms to the school, even though the school had said they didn't see anything, the forms 99% were full of it.
Yes.
Full of all the problems.
Yes.
So I think sometimes teachers aren't quite trained to understand what the forms are asking them, as in they can't manipulate them because they don't understand them enough. So they're going, from a sensory point of view, for instance, I was told that my daughter has no sensory problems in school, but when they said, how close does she sit to the person next to them? Oh, she can't sit next to somebody.
She's right.
She's like, no, get away from me. I hate humans. Can you all go away? And then it's when she walks down a corridor, oh yeah, she likes to sort of hug the wall. She cannot cope with touching people. Oh yeah, we've noticed she doesn't go into that school hall because it's got really strong smells. All of a sudden, these sensory issues came from somewhere.
There they are.
So don't panic too much about that.
But just on a note with that, actually, I do get 99. I say to parents, a parent got very upset last week, and I said, it's just a couple of forms to send to school. Is everything okay? But she'd been so gaslighted, where professionals had said to her face in assessments, I totally get it. I believe you. I'm going to write this. Report comes, suddenly you ring school and it's all in mum's head, and mum's anxiety is rubbing off on the child. I thought, that's funny, because mum didn't have any anxiety until she was dealing with the local authority.
Yeah, exactly.
So I say to them, that won't trick me, I promise, because 99% of the parents who send forms back from school say to me, I don't know who's on that form because it's not my kid. Because sometimes schools can just be like, fine, 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 fine. You know, some of the forms are really hard to manipulate. Some of them can just go fine, fine, fine. But then I use it in the report to go, I don't think school really understand the child because she's masking all day and they say it's fine. So it still adds evidence. We won't be manipulated by them. But I know it can be hard for parents to trust when so many professionals have said to their faces, then they ring school and suddenly the report's slightly different than maybe what was expected. So I get it's hard to trust when people say they won't.
No, I think, well, for me, I know that that would alleviate my worries, you know, listening to you say that. Bansi says, I don't know why my 9-year-old is struggling to attend school. School are being supportive and not placing any pressure for attendance, but I can't work out what's going on with her. What service would I book at Small Talk to get her assessed? She has no formal assessment or diagnosis or an EHCP.
So we've got 3 bands. We have an initial assessment, which is kind of getting to grips of what's going on. It's not quantified and specified because it doesn't take the same amount of time. So you can get that, and in that you would get the strategy to school and kind of a plan for like what is probably going on. If you were going to apply for an EHCP, you would need an EHCP one because it's got all the quantified and specified provision, and they're the reports that might take me 15 hours to write. And then you would only need a tribunal one if you're actually going to appeal. But something's going on, isn't it? Like, so if a child isn't going to school, doesn't mean the teachers are horrible. It could be like Chris has said, the smells. One lesson, the fact that they've got PE on a Tuesday could just set them off completely, and they then might not want to go. So it's just, yeah. But then sometimes we have to try and then turn an initial one into an EHCP one later down the line. But if you're going for an EHCP, it's got to be quantified and specified because you're not going to have any provision going. So you might just need an initial one just to kind of have a little dig around about what's going on.
Sounds like a good plan. And, you know, for anybody who would like more information on Small Talk, either have a look on Facebook because they've got a lovely page on Facebook, give them a Google, or just send us a message and comment or whatever you need to do, and we'll help you out with some links. I'll do the last one. Natasha, evening, Natasha. Another Natasha. So there's 2 Natashas in the room tonight.
Natasha, that's great.
RLA Ed Syke says he has to be across school and home for assessment for selective mutism.
Okay, yes, you do have to see what's going on at school, but I wouldn't have to go into school. I would get the school to fill in the selective mutism forms. That's part of the assessment, you know, because if I went into school, you know, if you sit in the middle of the lesson, the child might not be saying anything anyway because they're in class. It's not really a full picture. I send the forms and I assess the child in the session because you can spot it. Even the kids who come in super chatty with me because I'm really quite low arousal, I can still see if it's selective mutism. So I think selective mutism is a hot potato. No one seems to want to have ownership of it, or everybody thinks they know what they're doing. It gets batted between psychologists, selective mutism, speech and language therapists. Either or can assess and diagnose, but I would always make sure whoever you're going to has been on the Maggie Johnson extension level training, not just on a little webinar for an hour. That's because you're going to miss low profile if you don't know what you're doing. So make sure, it doesn't matter if it is a psychologist, doesn't have to be at school. It can be one or the other. I personally wouldn't ever assess a child without their parents, so I would never go to school. But make sure they've been on that training so you know what you're getting.
Yeah, so again, I mean, asking for qualifications is okay. I mean, if a parent came to you and said, what are your qualifications, you would not be offended, would you?
Well, no, because no, I wouldn't go to the doctor and start taking tablets and not asking what they were for. You are in your right to say, can you do this? Because if I can't, I will say, do you know what, that really isn't my thing. I'm going to have to pass you on. You know, I can't do swallowing or dysphagia. I will tell you that, and I'll give you the right person to go to. don't be offended, because it doesn't matter if your child gets the diagnosis of selective mutism. I'm getting so many 16-year-olds, or autistic, selectively mute, and they're doing the sliding in approach, and they've been doing it for a year, and you're like, oh, you've just wasted a year of this kid's life. So it's not just the diagnosis, it's making sure you've got a professional who isn't going to make it worse or waste your time with not the right approach. So definitely ask for qualifications. I would.
Well, at the end of the day, you've paid good money for your qualifications, so you want to brag about them.
Oh, I did my tax return in January. I was like, there is no way I've spent all of that on training. It's my addiction. I don't buy shoes. I buy training courses. So sad. But no, ask. There's nothing wrong with that. And because I wouldn't be offended, because I would say, yeah, I'm qualified. So you're not going to make me, you're not going to upset me. Ask. I wouldn't blame you if you did. Or just Google them if you're too scared to ask.
Absolutely, absolutely. Google is your friend. I'm going to ask, I know I said one more, but I'm going to just ask one more. This lady is going to reapply for an EHCP and only has a speech and language report from the NHS, diagnosis of speech and selective mutism, but it's saying that it's a choice not to speak. What other assessments would you advise? Educational psychology, occupational therapy, school are querying autism, but we think it's our anxiety from selective mutism that cause autistic type traits.
Well, I know I'm just biased, but I would probably pick a speech and language therapist who is an expert in selective mutism. Because if you came to me and said it's selective mutism, I wouldn't just assess the selective mutism. We always assess everything on everybody, just because there might be things that miss. She might have underlying speech and language needs that are impacting on the selective mutism. If you have a stammer or a speech sound disorder, that can cause anxiety and increase the selective mutism side of things. So yes, you have a diagnosis of selective mutism, but I would still tell you to pick a speech therapist who is expert in it, to make sure, because you've got someone saying it's a choice. So they might have diagnosed it, but they certainly aren't getting it.
No, absolutely. It's not a choice at all. Well, I could go on and on and on, and we could be here for hours, but we're already.
Well, my email address is on my Facebook page. So if anyone does have any more questions, then you can just email me. I don't mind. You might get an email really late. I'm sorry. If I don't email you back straight away, I will forget. So don't be offended if it's 2 o'clock in the morning.
That sounds like a sunshine email, that. Our staff just seem to be, Sunshine's like the New York
vampires.
Yeah, we're just like, we never sleep, it never closes. I found tonight so lovely. It's been an absolute delight. We need to do it more often.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me.
Have you still got your glass of wine?
I just didn't want people to think I drunk while I was at work. I had a really hard day, not it with the kids. I had a hard tribunal meeting, so I needed a drink when I quickly got home.
What they do to us.
Driving is, honestly, wine sales have gone, since tribunals, everyone's going to tribunal. I think wine sales are going through the roof. They're just sending everybody to tribunal, so all the wine's going off in the out the shop. But yes, if you have any questions, because I know private assessments are expensive. My eyes water sometimes when parents say to me, I've had a private report for a speech therapist. It was £1,500. I'm like, okay, and it's not, and then they have to come to me after, and I think, what a waste of that person's money, because they still had to pay for me. So I know it's a lot. So do your research, have a look. Are they any good? Go in the parent website. Sunshine's amazing. Ask all the parents. I think parents are, they are the biggest references I can have. It doesn't matter what the local authorities say about me, or Libby, or tribunals. If parents say, this person got my kid, this person's pretty good, ask other parents. They know who, and they will tell you who to stay away from as well.
Oh yes, it's very good.
Parents are great at that.
We're brilliant as parents.
Yes. Yes, if you've got any questions, just email me. Even if you need to say, I don't actually know what you do, just go on my Facebook page. There is a little thing I made with all the things speech and language therapists are supposed to assess. So go through, make a note of them. It's in like a little speech bubble, little meme thing. Write it down and make sure when you go to your speech therapist, go, are you going to assess all this then? And then you'll know if they're for you or not.
And of course, you could screenshot it. So it's there on your phone. That's just perfect.
Exactly.
What I'll do is once we've come off tonight, I'm going to re-edit the actual blurb on the top of the video, and I'll put all the links in to Natasha's page, Small Talk, all of that. So
Yes.
everybody's got the information that they need. And if you're struggling
And feel
to
free
find,
to put my email in,
perfect. Thank you.
Krista.
That would be brilliant. That would be brilliant. Thank you
That's
so
fine.
much. It's
Well,
been a
yes,
joy.
thanks for having me.
I loved
Oh,
it.
yes, I'm really looking forward to the Ruth Fiddler one tomorrow. I'm going to be on tomorrow again on Sunshine with my glass of wine. Luckily watching, not talking, so that's good. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I think that's me as well. So it's me and Ruth. So it's the first time, brand new webinar on PDA. So dead excited for that one.
Yes, Chris is going to lose a voice by Friday.
Yes. I'll be on the wine by Friday.
Well, have a lovely week.
You
Let me know if you've got any
too.
questions, anybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.